My next guest is just the opposite. Michael Minns is an attorney and the author of How to Survive the IRS, My Battles Against Goliath. Please welcome Michael to the show. And of course, IRS whistleblower Jennifer Long is also still with us. Good morning.
Good morning, baby.
A lot of people in the audience gasped when they heard these stories. When you heard these stories so far this morning, nothing new.
Nothing new. It's sad, but these are very common situations all over the United States.
Yeah. What's one of the situations that you listened to or heard that any one of us could face?
Well, the deduction, throwing off the deduction for children, something that everybody knows and they're entitled to. They did that with 2,000 airline pilots, threw off all the deductions for the children. It's not all uncommon.
Yeah. And again, your point also is not that people don't owe. It's just the treatment that people have gotten over the years. And one case in particular that stands out to you that you handled dealt with someone who was maced in the face.
The first chapter in my book, How to Survive the IRS, deals with Jim and Cookie Hobbs. IRS agents had his wife and his daughter maced in front of their 3-year-old grandchild. And she's 11 now. She's still never recovered from that. She still has trauma when she sees an authority figure of any kind. Then they threw them in jail. Neither one of them owed a tax. It was a mistake. It was a husband that owed a small tax. I ended up taking the case after they'd already been convicted, got it thrown out, and got them found not guilty ultimately.
Who is most likely to come under this type of attack?
Well, it could be anybody. I mean, sometimes people send, when you have a letter that you want to send, it should be to your congressperson, not to you don't write the Gestapo. That's just like a red flag demanding attention.
And what are some of those red flags? One, being self-employed seems to be one.
They have attacked a lot of self-employed. The people that get file Schedule Cs have more audits than any other group of people.
Do they feel like people who are self-employed are lying about the income, or what is it that makes them want to audit someone in particular who's self-employed?
Well, I think Ms. Long would tell you, and I would agree with her on that they have this tendency to just assume everyone is dishonest, and self-employed are more dishonest than everyone else.
Is it guilty before proven innocent?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have that mentality at the IRS.
Farmers?
Farmers are heavily audited. Of course, the way they're being taxed is destroying most of the family farms. Schedule A's are heavily audited. People who round their numbers off have a higher chances of being audited. They run statistical surveys, professors of economics and statistics.
And of course, a significant difference in your yearly deductions. Obviously, if one year you had 0 children, all of a sudden you have 15.
Yes,
that would raise a red flag.
I mean, that would make even a reasonable person be suspicious, but I would hate to call the IRS agents reasonable.
Okay. I got to tell you, I always thought people who got audited are people who had these big businesses and made lots of money. When I was in college, I made $8,000 that year. I was so happy, but I was getting a refund. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and refund never came. And then I ended up getting audited. And they said, I said, no, you owe me. And they looked at me and said, no, you probably owe us. And they kept searching for the money. I'm like, I'm a student. Right. I work part-time. And finally, 3 years later, they said, you know what, you're right. You did deserve your refund, but statute of limitations has run out, so you don't get anything. So I still want my money.
How many people like you are crushed? They're not as strong as you. They don't make it through that. They attack people often at their very weakest. When you were a student, it was the most difficult time.
And I gave up because I wasn't going to take on the IRS. All I could say was, you owe me my like $450, and you took that from me, and I really needed that. But anyway, up next, find out how this man has gotten away without paying income taxes for 8 years.
Filing a zero return since 1993, and I file it every year, and the government leaves me alone.
He hasn't paid, and he says you shouldn't either. That's coming up next. Two sure things in life, death and taxes, right? Well, my next guest says maybe death, but not taxes. He hasn't paid his income taxes for the past 8 years. Erin Schiff is the author of How Anyone Can Stop Paying Taxes and also the author of The Federal Mafia. Good morning.
Deborah, it's a pleasure to be here.
So you say legally we shouldn't have to pay our taxes?
Income taxes. There are many taxes I pay. Property taxes, sales taxes, excise taxes. When I buy a plane ticket, I pay tax. But there's one tax you don't have to pay, and that's income tax. and I have in front of me the Internal Revenue Code, the current Internal Revenue Code, and I sell it. I'm the nation's leading seller of Internal Revenue Codes, and I tab it. And would you believe there's no provision in the law that requires you to pay income taxes or keep books and records for tax purposes? The income tax represents the greatest program of organized extortion the world has ever seen.
Okay, but Erwin, let's be honest about this. Okay, although we've heard, and I know that sounds good, and you're all excited about that. It's like, do I like giving up a chunk of my salary, you know, every year? No. Do I think there's a lot of government waste when it comes to spending our tax dollars? Absolutely. But you know what? I grew up in third world countries. I've traveled in third world countries. I know what it's like when kids cannot just go to school and get a real good education. I know what it's like not to be able to drive down a street and actually survive it. And, you know, I know what it's like when we don't have a public housing, organization that deals with public housing. You see people living in the streets, and when they're hungry and they're living in the streets, guess where they're going to get their food? Guess where they're going to get their money? From you. Not voluntarily either. They're going to rob you. So I've been through that. And so I got to say, although it's not fun to give up the money that you work for, I don't think it's fair that you can drive down the street that I help pay for.
No, I pay for...
You do property tax. Okay, but like public school and other places that taxes go to.
I pay property tax.
But there are other things that come through income taxes. There are other privileges this country has.
The government takes your money and gives it to pay farmers not to grow food. The government wastes about billions of dollars every year.
I agree with you on the waste issue, but there are a lot of things that they pay for that makes America a great country to live in.
It was greater before the income tax. Before the income tax,
if I got to pay, then you got to pay too.
Before the income tax, the income tax started in 1943 with withholding taxes. Before the income tax, America was the greatest producer of goods in the world. We exported all kinds of consumer goods. Now half the containers that come into the Houston port here
Michael,
go back.
It was 1913, not 1943.
But the withholding tax started in The withholding taxes started in 1943, and up until 1943, the vast middle class didn't pay income tax. The withholding started, and the vast middle class, and before the income tax really started, the dollar was regarded as the world's most reliable currency. America was a creditor nation. Now we're the world's biggest debtor nation. A former Chief Justice, John Marshall, said the power to tax is the power to destroy, and that's what the federal government is doing with the income tax. But more important, the federal government is collecting the income tax through extortion because there is no law that requires you to pay income tax. And if anything, we want an honest government, and we have a dishonest government. Because I have in front of me a 1040 booklet. And right in this booklet, on page 54 in the Privacy Act, the government tells you, Deborah, you don't have to pay income taxes. For instance,
exactly what in there. Let me see what this says here. Okay.
Incidentally, did you file a tax return last year?
I always do.
You filed a confession, not a return. You confessed. Now, let me tell you what it says here.
I'm trying to get right here why I don't have to pay.
Okay, I'm going to tell you. It says all information right here can be used against you, can be given to the Department of Justice. All information on a tax return can be used against you. Is it okay with you if you use if the government uses your tax return information to prosecute you with? Is that okay with you?
Well, I wouldn't like them to prosecute me. That's why I pay. But speaking of, you spent some time in prison.
For not filing. But starting 8 years ago, I developed a zero return. And if you go to my website, you'll see I have a building that I occupy in Las Vegas. And on the roof of my building, there's a big sign that's 14 feet long and 4 feet high. And it says, why pay income taxes when you don't have to? And
so if in America tomorrow, everybody all the income taxes you ever paid, they just gave back to you, and are you saying that we wouldn't feel it in this country?
We'd have more money locally. The government wastes most of our money. Who can spend your money better, you or the federal government? I was in Army Finance, and I saw how the government wasted more and more of our money. The government wastes most of our money.
I agree with the waste part. I've seen that.
The point is, are you required to pay income taxes, yes or no? If you want to pay income taxes, Deborah, believing you're required to pay it, then you're under a false misconception. If you want to pay it voluntary, income tax is based on voluntary compliance and self-assessment. If any accountant or lawyer tells you have to pay income taxes, ask him to show you the statute that says so. There is no statute.
Well, we've got a lawyer with us right here, Michael Mins.
Michael Mins will not be able to find in this Internal Revenue Code any provision of the law that requires you to pay income tax.
The case against you, Erwin. And we pulled this off the internet this morning. This is where you were sued for not paying someone who showed the statutes. And I don't want to be in a position of defending the IRS.
Hold on 1 second. This is a guy who's taken on the IRS,
Yes.
and when they were wrong, and then...
Michael,
let
me ask you something, Michael. Are you required to file a tax return?
Yes.
Can all information on a tax return be used against you?
Yes.
Then how can you be required to give it?
I think that was a bad ruling, but we have to
It's not a bad ruling. He's another lawyer. He's not telling you the truth because there is...
Okay.
Now, what Michael is doing is bringing up a case.
Rather than make stuff up, let's read from your case, from the Court of Appeals. Schiff refers to himself as an economist and a constitutionalist and America's leading untaxed expert.
Hold on.
Well, this is the case. I didn't write this. These judges did. If anybody calls this show, I have the code, and cites any section of this code and says an individual is required to file a tax return, I will pay them $100,000. You were sued. You were sued by a lawyer named Newman on a legal technicality. He won in the... Wait a second. Let me finish.
What are you doing, Michael?
No, they said that he didn't call in during the show, otherwise you would have owed him, and they said you were a hoax and a phony. This is what the court said.
That's what the judge said. The judge is another lawyer, and the income tax supports half the lawyers in this country. If it weren't for the income tax...
You've widowed you put more people in jail than the IRS has, Erwin. You give them easy cases to win, and then you put victims, and they end up in jail.
If it weren't for the income tax, half the lawyers in this country would have to find out a job.
More children than the Vietnam War.
So basically you're saying that we don't have to pay taxes if we just don't file?
Let me show you. I'll give you $100,000, Michael. I'll make the offer right on this program.
I can pay my tax bill.
Okay, here it is.
Okay, I accept the offer.
Here is a 1040 booklet.
Okay.
It says right here that you only have to file a return for any tax you are liable for. So the government tells you right here that you only have to pay a tax for which you're liable. I have the Internal Revenue Code right here. Now, in the index of the code, there's a whole section that shows you what taxes you can be liable for. They indicate wagering taxes.
Don't read the whole code, Erwin. What's your offer?
They indicate wagering taxes. Show me where in here it says persons earning income.
I'm going to read from your case, Erwin.
He's reading
Code section 6012. Code section 6353.
Are you saying section
Code section 7201, which put you in jail, I believe. 7202 and 7203.
Are you saying, Michael, that there's a statute?
Are you on probation now?
Are you saying, Michael? Are you saying?
Erwin, we got to say, when you suggest to people,
and I want your $100,000.
when you suggest to people, here's a way to not pay your taxes.
Show me the law that says you got to pay income tax.
Okay, while he's looking that up over there, Erwin, I got to ask you a question. Over here,
your favorite.
Erwin, over here for a second. Now, when
can you talk to me
yeah, I'm gonna talk to you.
He's a lawyer.
Okay, Michael, you look at the book and.
And lawyers are professional liars.
Well,
and Michael is demonstrating the truth of that.
But then when you need one, they're not. Okay, but anyway,
there is no statute.
Did you use one when you went to prison?
I was convicted for failing to file. In the past years I did not.
But let me ask this: there are people who out there who want to follow exactly what you're saying.
Yes.
Do they realize that by following this, there's no guarantee that they're not going to go to jail?
Well, the people who file tax returns, Leona Hemsley.
No, people who follow your
nobody who's followed my advice is ever going to jail.
Dr. Larry Goss.
As a matter of fact, let me just make the statement because he spoke and they didn't have me interrupting him. The fact of the matter is that if you go to my website, you will see hundreds of. We have a number of refund checks. I teach people how to file a tax return and get a refund of every penny of taxes you paid last year. Now, if filing a refund
do they really get it?
Yes, they get it.
As a matter of fact, 5 years later, they get an audit.
Stop interrupting me.
They get an audit. Okay. Yeah, so they really get it. Okay, Dr. Larry Goss is in our audience this morning.
He's a lawyer. Remember, he's a lawyer.
Let's go from a lawyer to a doctor. Okay, Dr. Larry Goss.
The fact of the matter is, I teach people how to file refund claims to get back every penny of taxes. Now, there's a law that makes it a crime. It makes it a crime. You stop interrupting me.
Okay, let's hold on 1 second.
Tell me.
Let me just ask Dr. Larry Goss. Let's just give Dr. Larry Goss a chance. You are a red-blooded American. You were in the military, the whole bit, but you agree with Erwin, and you're trying his plan. Okay, so what have you done so far?
Let me tell you one thing about Erwin. Erwin said something that I've said for a long time ago. I was an officer in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam era. And I can remember when I got my commission raising my hand and swearing an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And believe me, the IRS is an enemy of this country. They are destroying this Constitution. And as far as I can remember, I never rescinded that oath.
Okay, so you're not filing for how long?
I'm filing.
You're filing. Okay,
Yes.
so you haven't
He files
quite
a zero
done.
returns.
Okay. Do you feel any threat of going to prison because of
You
that?
have to understand something. From where I came in my situation, I felt fear for years, 20 years. Okay? We lost the house that my wife and I were married in, that we brought our first son home in through all of this. And I was ignorant. I followed lawyers. And quite frankly, just let me interject that if doctors, physicians in this country practice medicine like lawyers practice law, there wouldn't be a population explosion.
We have the shortest life expectancy in the world.
But that's an aside. You know, throughout all of this, I didn't really understand the law. I went to lawyers, lawyer after lawyer after lawyer, and quite frankly, there was not a lawyer that I've been sat down with, bankruptcy lawyers, tax lawyers, that I didn't have to instruct in some point of law. And I'm not a lawyer. But my butt was in the ringer, so I went to the law library, and if he said something, I looked it up. And guess what? They either didn't know or they were lying to me.
Okay. Well, speaking of law, let me just make a point right now. We are not advocating that you do what Irwin suggests. Irwin's advocating that you do what he suggests. That's okay. I just want to make sure that people understand we're not suggesting that people do this, but you have a story and you've told people across the country this, and we just wanted you to explain where you got that from.
Let me tell you what the public can do. The law is fine. There's nothing wrong with the law. The income tax is based on voluntary compliance and self-assessment. This lawyer just told you that all information on a tax return can be used against you. Now, the Fifth Amendment makes it illegal for the government to compel you to give information that can be used against you. If the law ever did require what he said the law required, the law would be unconstitutional, but it's not. There's nothing wrong with the law. The problem is with lawyers who try to convince the public that the IRS has any authority to do anything. In this code book, IRS agents have no authority to do anything, and every American has a right to stop the withholding of taxes from their pay, and everybody out here is entitled to a refund of all the taxes they paid last year, and I'll show them how to get that refund. And if I couldn't, I'd be guilty of mail fraud, stock fraud, and consumer fraud.
With that said, we'll take a break. Coming up, so you think you're sheltering some of your money from being taxed? Well, think again. You may want to hear what this group of taxpayers has to say. They've been in a 20-year battle with the IRS over what they thought was their retirement money. We'll tell you more when we come back. What a fraud you are. For me, please. You were part of a group that thought you were putting money away for your retirement, and you had certain, tax deferred, some things are tax deferred, or some things weren't taxed at all. What ended up happening?
Well, the IRS basically disagreed with our investment, went in, attacked the companies, raided the offices, and got information on all the investors that way. After that, they issued just blanket statutory deficiencies. They disallowed interest on my home, interest or child care credit. They disallowed every deduction we took. We've been in court with them for 20 years.
20 years. How much do they say your tax bill is now?
Well, I'm assuming, and this is only my assumption, that by this time it's probably for myself $600,000 to $800,000.
Wow.
They have committed perjury against us. They've committed fraud on the court. Things that I would be in jail for.
Yeah, and that's an ongoing case. And Michael, you're actually representing them in that case.
Yes,
all right.
yes.
Thank you very much. With all that we heard today, when it's all said and done, I got to tell you, personally, I had to call the IRS recently, and I was shocked. I was scared, and I was shocked at how nice they were. And Jennifer, I was shocked. The woman was like, "Hi, well, would you like to make payments?" I said, "No." And she goes, "Well, how's the weather down there in Houston?" Really? Really? And that's not how they were when I dealt with them the first time around. And Jennifer, would you say that because of all the hearings and things, it is a kinder, gentler IRS?
I do think they're nicer to the taxpayers, and they are, I think, encouraging us to be nicer to the taxpayer.
And there are things that we can do today that we couldn't do years ago. For example, I mean, did you guys realize that they're saying, "Would you like to make some payments?" It used to be, it was due and that was it. Now you can make payments, up to a couple of years. And I think a lot of people were under the assumption that you really couldn't. And so, but the worst thing you could possibly do in dealing with your tax bill is to do what a lot of people do because they're so afraid, is that you run and hide and you don't call them back You don't send anything in. You don't say anything to them. You pretend that they're going to go away. Well, they don't. That's when they end up showing up with your accounts frozen and things like that. So in their defense, at least try to work with them. You don't know if you're going to be treated badly unless you try to work with them. And at that point is when you can decide that you might need help from somebody like a Michael Menz or whatever, but you got to give them a chance. And I know, Erwin, you have your point that we shouldn't pay taxes, but I'm sorry, I'm scared to death. I've been to countries where people ain't paying taxes, and it's not a great place to live.
Let me make this point. If you pay income taxes, knowing that it's voluntary and you're paying anyway, fine. But I don't believe the government should extort taxes from the American public. The difference is, you heard Michael say.
How many of you voluntarily, if it was voluntary, how many of you would give up, whatever, 15, 10, 25% of your income? None of you. Okay, well, thank you. We'll be right back right after this. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining us today. Michael Menz, by the way, has a book signing tonight at River Oaks Bookstore. And if you would like Erwin Schiff's book, you can go online, paynoincometaxes.com, and get that book. Paynoincometax.com. Okay, because you say, you know what, we can do without paying income taxes, and we can still function with all the other taxes we have to pay. All right, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is one of those conversations that could go on forever. April 15th, just around the corner. Have a great day.